If there is no God establishing a right and wrong, then there is no right and wrong because there is no law that we're conforming ourselves to. We're just doing stuff, all right?
Existential tragedy turn to religion to give us a sort of sense of fulfillment and a sense of explanation. But when asked about the mechanism of how, I'm told it's because at some undisclosed number of years ago, somebody committed a sin against God, and that's why your child has now died of cancer. There are millions of people who listen to this show. There will be people listening to this whose children have died of cancer. I wonder if that brings them any kind of consolation.
Well, I don't know.
Similarly, the idea that, maybe it's some disgruntled angels who didn't want to come down to Earth for too long, and so if anything, you're actually doing them a favor by killing them of cancer.
Not the way that Alex has taken. It's a grand explanation of pretty much everything.
It's not an explanation of everything. It's an explanation of the variance of life on Earth.
Because evolution does... I was thinking about my dog. I was thinking about Pablo, and I was thinking, why does he have sex with other dogs? Why does he eat? Why does he protect his puppies?
Yeah.
Why does he do these things that, somewhat in Dr. K's example there, he takes care of things. He takes care of me. When I'm not in the house, if someone comes in and my girlfriend's there, he takes care of my girlfriend. He barks only when she's at home alone. So he seems to be expressing some form of morality.
That's because the New Atheist movement was quite philosophically shallow. It didn't seriously engage with the existential component of religious belief and why it exists in the first place. And I think that is why it exists. I think humans are in a strange predicament due to the mystery of consciousness. We find ourselves possibly uniquely amongst other animals in a position of being mortal, being physically embodied, being in a world, but also knowing those things. It's one thing to experience the world. It's another thing to be aware that you're experiencing it. Josh Rasmussen once said, there's a difference between noticing a tree and noticing that you've noticed a tree. We have this sort of second order abstraction that we can do. So we know that death is coming, for example, and death makes a mockery of everything that we do. It seems to just obliterate any sense of purpose or meaning because anything that we're building will ultimately, as far as we're concerned, be gone. And that may well be unique to human beings. And so I'm not the first to suggest that the principal motivating factor behind meaning-infused activities that humans do is an engagement in death denial or some kind of immortality project. People literally, for fear of, as a result of the knowledge that this will come to an end, engage in what we might call immortality projects. They engage in things which will outlast themselves, which give them a sense of escaping this death. The most obvious example is in religious traditions, which literally promise immortality for your own soul. But if you look just practically at where people subjectively report finding meaning, they find it in their children. They might find it in their job, but they're unlikely to find it in their job if they're doing something they don't really care about. They'll find it in their job. Maybe they're like a barrister and they find a lot of meaning in bringing justice into the world because they're participating in a system which they believe will outlast them and is bigger than them. So when people talk about meaning, we talk about transcendence, something being above and beyond their own sort of material situation. And I think religion is the archetypal example of this. And I think it's why it evolves in the first place. There is this idea that we are living in a meaning crisis that has cropped up maybe in the past 100 years or so, or maybe in the last few hundred years or so as a response to the Enlightenment and the decline of religion. I think that's far too easy. I think that's way too easy. I think that if there is such thing as a meaning crisis, it is literally the human condition and the reason why these projects were invented in the first place. I think literally speaking, what people are doing in religious traditions is realizing the finitude of their existence and therefore trying to commune with something
Can I add a
less
thought to
finite.
this?
Of course.
We have this hunger, and I have no reason to believe that any naturalistic explanation can explain the consciousness's hunger for meaning and significance, because that's all propositional. It's not molecules in motion.
What's naturalistic mean?
Naturalistic just means nature, and that's all there is, basically. So you have molecules in motion, largely governed by natural law. There is no outside transcendent anything. There's no immaterial anything, certainly not an immaterial God that has started the process and sustains the process and gives life meaning. There either is meaning objectively or not. Okay. If not, then it's up to us.
For example, a moment ago you said that if there is a creator God who brings us into existence, then you are designed and you are given purpose by God. And I think we need to investigate this a bit further. Because, for example, a quite sort of boring and overdone debate at the moment is the extent to which we are engaged in the production of potentially artificially conscious agents with artificial intelligence technologies. And there's all this discussion about whether or not these things can be conscious, like, whatever. But let's just suppose for a moment that they were. Let's suppose that I created an artificially intelligent machine and I gave it a purpose, and that purpose was to produce paper clips. And because of the development of artificial intelligence technology, it became conscious in a recognizable sense. It had an interior sense of self. It sort of had, say, feelings or emotions about the world. But it is just an AI robot whose entire purpose in life is to make paper clips. Now, I could say that because that AI was designed by a creator with a purpose that was explicitly given to it, that life is meaningful. But I think it would seem to most people that a life whose meaning consists in creating paper clips is not sufficient, is not enough to address what people really want. It's not just some kind of purpose. It's not just even some kind of purpose which is given to you by an authoritative creative source.
So can I respond?
It's something which is further than that. Yeah, but if I can just relate this to the God question, the problem that arises is that you have to answer the question of why God infuses life with the meaning that he gives it. It's either something which he has sort of arbitrarily plucked up and chosen to create, in which case we have this problem of arbitrariness, or no, or in fact, there is some reason why God had to give us a particular kind of meaning that's endemic to the human condition, that he had no choice but for that meaning, that more important kind of meaning, to be given to human life. But if he was beholden to that, if he had to give us a particular kind of meaning, it seems like there's a standard of meaning which exists outside of God. So I'm not sure, in other words, the mechanism by which being created by someone who says this is your purpose would be fulfilling in the way that people want it to be.
Most psychologists agree that humans are unique in being aware of our own mortality. Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, and later Terror Management Theory in Psychology show that much of culture, religion, nationalism, even the drive for fame, comes from trying to cope with the fact that we will die. Studies have shown that when people are reminded of their mortality, they become more likely to defend religious beliefs and cultural traditions, exactly as Alex says. Religion offers immortality, but that doesn't prove it's true. It only proves that people want it. History shows that every major religion has promised some way to transcend death, but they all contradict each other. Christianity says salvation is through Jesus. Islam says it's through the Quran and Muhammad. Buddhism promises rebirth until enlightenment. They can't all be right, which strongly suggests they are human-made attempts to soothe the same fear. And when Alex compares us to a hypothetical AI designed only to make paperclips, he's showing that being given purpose by a creator doesn't automatically make life meaningful. Meaning has to be created from within, not handed down arbitrarily. That's why secular thinkers argue we build meaning through relationships, creativity, and contributions that last beyond us, not because a deity dictated it, but because we choose it.
A solution to that moment of suffering. So if my parents end up dying someday, which I'm sure they will, I will believe that they are still alive and they are somewhere and they're fine, which will ease my suffering. So I agree with Alex in that regard. The problem I have is in order to adopt that view, I need to believe it. It's true. People aren't very good at lying to themselves. And also when you talk about my friend in Dubai has had this experience, he now feels better. He could have well felt better, I believe, if he had, believed that Islam was true and become a Muslim. So it's the feeling itself people can get in a lot of ways. I know people that actually would tell you that they feel better now that they're out of the cult and they're agnostic. And the cult made them feel terrible. Now they're agnostic, they feel better. Does that mean agnosticism is truth?
So the presumption that you made is a presumption. We have to keep that in mind. I mean, the people that I have talked to who were former Muslims and are now Christians, very devout Muslims, they did not have the experience of satisfaction, fullness, and connection with God in Islam that they do in Christianity. Okay, so we want to be careful that we don't.
There are people who do the opposite, though.
Yeah, there's people that would have gone the other way, and they'll be in the comment section right now saying, "Well, I went from Christianity to Islam."
Okay, well, sure. I'm just telling you what I know of those people. Okay, and I think it's a mistake to say, well, everybody has their own religion. They have their some experience with their religion, because I don't think that's the case. I'm not saying there aren't satisfied Muslims. That's not what I'm saying, or Buddhists or Hindus or whatever. What I'm saying is there is an evidential element to the changed life, okay, and it may not be decisive. There may be other things that are involved, okay. I do think that for many Christians, I think you've made this point in the past too, it's the experience with God that makes the difference. But it's not that the other evidences for the existence of God, maybe philosophical type of evidence, haven't made a difference. Because I've talked to lots of people where they have made the difference, moving them in that direction.
The point there that it's evidential, that's a presumption.
What I mean by evidential is that there is information that can be brought to bear that seems to be evidence indicating that the belief system is true.
Is that a presumption?
I don't know why you would call it a presumption.
As in the evidence that Christianity is true from the increased sense of purpose that people get from becoming a Christian.
I think that's one of the evidence. It's a subjective evidence, yeah.
So it's
evidence of the truth of Christianity.
Well, I wouldn't build the whole thing.
But it's evidence. It's contributing evidence to the actual truth of
think of it
Christianity
this
as
way.
a worldview.
If the story of reality is simply that God made us to be with Him, and then we find the way that God intends for us to connect with Him, principally through forgiveness and be restored to our relationship with the Father, and then that gives us, when we do that, a deep sense of satisfaction. I do think that's evidential.
You know, in Alex Field, he could explain that through neuroscience, right? Serotonin, dopamine, endorphins.
Yeah, so can I go back to something real quick?
Go ahead.
So, I was thinking about the Sisyphus example.
Yes.
And I was just thinking to myself, so many people go to the gym to do futile physical activity.
But not on its own for eternity, with no sense in which it's improving their life, right? Imagine going to the gym and not only is it not making you healthier, it's actually just making you fatter, and you have to do it forever, for the rest of eternity, for no reason, with no end. And then somebody says, well, all you've got to do is imagine that person being happy.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting, because then that presumes that the attitude through which you approach the action is what determines it.
Determines what?
Determines whether you're happy or not, right? So every time you eat, you buy yourself a trip to the toilet. This is something you can never escape.
Sure.
It is true for all time. And yet, how do you feel about going to the toilet?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're getting at.
So I think it's interesting, right? Because the problem of Sisyphus is in the way that he views it. And this is exactly why I think the paperclip example is actually such a good one, because I think what we find when we look at some of these things like radical acceptance, dialectical behavioral therapy, sort of the ways in which people become happy despite the fact that there are painful things in life, it is an attitudinal shift.
Totally. I think one of the reasons why it might seem like we keep talking across purposes is because I think you are offering an explanation for why people feel a particular way, and I'm trying to see whether those feelings are, shall we say, philosophically validated, whether they are those feelings are sensitive to truth. If the way you feel about the world is accurate. So I can perfectly understand that it's possible for Sisyphus to be happy. What I'm saying is that I think that the philosophical underpinning that would be required for him to be content in that condition is unsatisfying, at least to me. So
what is a philosophical truth?
It doesn't have to, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say philosophical truth, but I mean to separate it from what you might describe as like a neurological truth, which is to say it could be true that your brain believes this or believes that based on this or that condition. And I'm saying that totally. But what I'm interested in is the thing that it believes. Is it true or false? It could be in the same way that, believing in Christianity can make you happy, it can make you sad, and you can scan someone's brain. You can put them in an MRI scanner and scan their brain when at the moment they convert to Christianity and see that it starts going haywire.
Yeah, but
nothing to do with
MRI
the
is
truth.
not going to show any beliefs. It
Nothing
shows
to do with the truth of the claim.
neurological activity.
Exactly.
Beliefs aren't in the brain.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in this.
I kind of agree with that.
So, Alex, I think this is what I thank you so much for pointing out how we're kind of talking across each other, because I think this is the really weird thing. And I'm going to say something, and then as we talk about consciousness and what we just talked about, I'm going to torpedo it. Mm-hmm. But I think what we sort of find is that from a practical sense, and this could be where like philosophy, I don't know how the word practical ties together with philosophy, because I tend to think of philosophy as sort of practical. We can go into that in a second. But I think from the perspective of finding purpose, now I'm not talking about purpose as a capital P truth, right? Like capital T truth. Finding purpose, it may not be philosophically satisfying to you, but what we sort of know from empirical evidence of people who are purposeless and people who are purposeful is that the subjective feeling of purpose comes out of a number of different things. Like I mentioned, like kind of autonomy, being able to detect your emotions, also a sense of like narrative identity. So having a purpose in life requires a you. And one of the reasons that no one feels like they are going somewhere in life is because they don't really have a clear sense of who they are. And so I think that it's a great kind of catch that we're sort of talking across purposes, because I don't know, the thing that you find not philosophically true, maybe neurologically true, but isn't philosophically true. I don't know how to approach that. I mean, I think I sort of do, because if we talk about consciousness and subjective experience and how your friend was transformed, and by the way, he may not be transformed. So speaking of coping, there's a chance that when someone, drastically joins a religion, like, this is great, that is like the mother of all copes. Right. So sometimes it's not identity formation, it's actually identification, where like, I'm going to join this team and now I'm on this team. And now that I have this team, now I know who I am. Now I have a purpose, like everything kind of gets laid out. But oftentimes this is also why religion is not like 100% at giving people happiness and things like that, because there is an internal subjective experience of a relationship with God or something like that, which I think we can segue to consciousness. That's ultimately what determines whether you feel really good about it.
Religious people often claim that their sense of peace or joy is evidence that their beliefs are true. But feeling comforted doesn't make something fact. Neuroscience shows that powerful emotional states, like a conversion moment or a deep prayer, activate dopamine and serotonin pathways in the brain. The same brain activity happens when people fall in love, meditate, or even take psychedelic drugs. A chemical rush in the brain is evidence of altered experience, not proof of divine truth. History also shows how feelings can be misleading. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus all report the same overwhelming sense of peace when practicing their faiths. If personal satisfaction proved truth, then every religion would have to be correct at the same time, which is impossible because their core claims contradict each other. What actually explains this is psychology, not theology. Social identity theory shows that joining a religious group provides belonging and stability. In moments of suffering, that structure feels like meaning, but it's not evidence that the beliefs are objectively true. Even philosophers like Albert Camus warned against coping illusions. His famous Sisyphus analogy argued that people can learn to live without ultimate meaning by changing their attitude toward life's struggle, rather than inventing stories to escape it. Modern therapies like dialectical behavioral therapy echo this by teaching people to accept pain and still build a purposeful life. That's why agnosticism and atheism aren't empty. They are honest. They recognize that comfort isn't the same as truth, and meaning has to be built from our choices, not handed down by dogma.
My sense is that God made us for that purpose: be fruitful, multiply, subdue. And subdue doesn't mean rape the earth. It means to work productively what God has given us to serve. Now, somebody can get married and stay married and have children and fulfill that purpose there and be very satisfied in doing it, as opposed to all kinds of other variations that's just going to mess up their life. And they're going to experience satisfaction and fulfillment in it. But that's because they're, in a certain sense, They're doing the things that God has made human beings to do so that they would flourish. It's just like you can think of it in very mechanistic terms. You have a vehicle that's meant to operate a certain way, and if you do the things properly for that vehicle, it's going to run well and do.
So I can have a grand feeling of purpose if I do many of the things that are considered virtuous within Scripture without needing to believe.
Yeah, you could still be virtuous. Certainly, you can do those things. My argument, and this is what I was getting at a little earlier, Dr. K, is that if there is no God establishing a right and wrong, then there is no right and wrong because there is no law that we're conforming ourselves to. We're just doing stuff, all right? Now,
if you believe the sort of evolutionary perspective on
I don't.
this,
taken as a whole, I don't. Not the way that Alex has taken. It's a grand explanation of pretty much everything.
It's not an explanation of everything. It's an explanation of the variance of life on Earth.
because evolution does. I was thinking about my dog. I was thinking about Pablo, and I was thinking, why does he have sex with other dogs? Why does he eat? Why does he protect his puppies?
Yeah.
Why does he do these things that, somewhat in Dr. K's example there, he takes care of things. He takes care of me when I'm not in the house. If someone comes in and my girlfriend's there, he takes care of my girlfriend. He barks only when she's at home alone. So he seems to be expressing some form of morality. He seems to understand his own sort of idea of right and wrong. But I wouldn't
characterize it that way, as if he's thinking, I ought to do this, and if I don't do that, then I'm doing something wrong. I think animals have instincts that they're imbued with that can be influenced by natural factors to some degree, I guess. But they are made for purposes, and this is the reason that many of the creatures act the way they do is because of these very sophisticated instincts that allow them to get along in life and do well.
Survive and reproduce.
But I don't have any reason to think that survive and reproduce, of course. But I don't have any reason to think that they're thinking I'm doing the moral thing. And if they didn't do the thing that we would be, it would be appropriate to accuse them of doing something immoral, vice or whatever.
History's almost shown that even in times where we look back and go, that was not the moral thing, like, Nazis in World War II.
Yeah.
They acted in a way that helped them survive in the context they were in. So the Nazi that would go to the concentration camp and then come home and be really nice to his family, he thought he was doing the right thing.
This is why one of the reasons I think this is the evolutionary explanation is inadequate, okay? Because it seems that there are lots of things that people do that seem to be good for them or for their tribe that characteristically we'll look at and we'll assess it. And the assessment is that is wrong, it's evil, it's wicked. And I think that our assessments are reliable in that regard, okay? That we have moral intuitions that allow us to see things that are real about that. And these things are relatively universal. I mean, it doesn't matter where you live or when you live, people are asking the question about the problem of evil in the world, okay? And I think it's because
the definition of what evil was seems to change over time. Because I wouldn't be sat at this table a couple hundred years ago because I'm black. And everybody at the time thought that was the right thing. They didn't think that was an evil thing at the time.
Well, everybody at the time didn't think that. But there are going to be social mores and that are going to change over time, and people do respond in different ways. But just because you have variations in the way people believe about morality doesn't mean that there isn't a morality that's a sound morality. And C.S. Lewis has done a study of this, looked at the kinds of things that seem to transcend culture in terms of assessments, moral assessments that seem to be true about every culture. A lot of times the differences are not differences in moral facts, but they're like the morality has actually changed, but a difference in perception, okay? So what counts as heroism in some cases would not count as heroism in other cases, even though heroism is considered a noble kind of thing.
I've been waiting for an opportunity to rewind to the fact that we just brushed over two of what I think are the best available, at least the first that came to mind, explanations as to why children get cancer. And I just wondered, as a question, whether you consider whether your explanation sounds to you as your explanation sounds to you, as I think both of them sound to me, and I don't know how they sound to you, Stephen, but the idea that the thing that we are most fundamentally confronted with, I think, on an existential level, is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And there's our own suffering, and then there's the suffering of others, and the seemingly meaningless suffering of a child who's undergoing cancer and does not survive it. And I'm told that in the face of such existential tragedy, I turn to religion to give us a sort of sense of fulfillment and a sense of explanation. But when asked about the mechanism of how, I'm told it's because at some undisclosed number of years ago, somebody committed a sin against God, and that's why your child has now died of cancer. There are millions of people who listen to this show. There will be people listening to this whose children have died of cancer. I wonder if that brings them any kind of consolation.
Well, I don't.
Similarly, the idea that, maybe it's some disgruntled angels who didn't want to come down to earth for too long, and so if anything, you're actually doing them a favor by killing them of cancer. I don't know if that's bringing the kind of fulfillment
I don't know.
people are looking for.
What's your answer to that?
I don't think I have one, but I don't like people professing that they do have an answer, but when it comes down to it, actually saying something which I think will provide the opposite effect. And I don't mean this personally. I mean as a point of religious explanation. The idea that this
is going to bring comfort.
Everyone's going to get a chance to respond to this. So.
The idea that this even approximates an explanation as to why this happens. I would ask you to consider what you find more likely if we assume that we are essentially existing here as accidental organisms just competing in a struggle for survival with no endowed meaning or supervision. What might we expect to find? And I would ask what you would expect to find if we were created with purpose by a loving God who wants us all to come into communion with him, but for some reason thinks it's necessary that we exist in this vale of tears, in this material world first. What would you expect to find? I don't think. And then look at what you do find. Look at what you do find in the natural world. Even if you just take into consideration non-human animal suffering, just an unfathomable amount of negative experience for seemingly no reason. Not to mention the fact that children are getting cancer, as you say, and as you've already alluded to, there are evils that humans commit, like the Holocaust, but there are evils which they don't, like earthquakes and tsunamis and the like. Well, I don't think we would expect to see any of this if we assume that hypothesis. But if we assume that we are just accidentally existing organisms in a struggle for survival, not only do we explain this, but we also come to expect it. So I think it provides a much better explanation. That is not to say justification. The idea, we were talking about evolution, and you said that the problem that you have with the Darwinian worldview is that it seems to favor survival of the fittest, and yet there are things which evolution seems to point to that we would morally condemn. Well, of course, because evolution by natural selection is an explanation for how things got the way they were. It's in no way a justification for behaviors. It doesn't even function that way. No scientific theory of why things happen are any kind of justification, any more than Newton's laws of gravity are a justification, a moral justification for the motion of the planets. That's, of course, it's not the case. It's just an explanation. But I just really want to drive home this point, that it has to do more. If you want religious traditions to do what you claim that they do, which is provide existential comfort for people who are suffering, you have to do more in the face of children dying of cancer than some reference to mythical human beings who existed or in a way that is completely unintelligible.
Christians argue morality only comes from God, but history shows otherwise. The Bible itself once defended practices we now see as immoral. In Exodus 21:20-21, slavery is permitted if the slave survives a beating. In Deuteronomy 22:28-29, a rapist is ordered to marry his victim. If morality were absolute from God, these laws wouldn't exist, and Christians wouldn't need to quietly ignore them today. Morality clearly evolves with human progress, not divine decree. Science explains it better. Our sense of right and wrong comes from the brain. Studies show the prefrontal cortex lights up when we make moral judgments, proving morality is rooted in evolution and social cooperation. Even animals show this. Dogs protect their families and elephants mourn their dead, without any belief in scripture. And suffering makes the problem worse. Religion claims cancer in children exists because of Adam's sin, Romans 5:12, or Satan's influence, 1 Peter 5:8. But that doesn't match reality. Evolution explains why suffering happens, genetic mutations, disease, natural disasters, without the need for supernatural blame. It's harsh, but it's honest, and it gives us a reason to fight suffering with science, medicine, and compassion instead of myths. So here's the real question. If we see endless suffering and moral contradictions in the Bible, does the evidence point to a loving God or to a natural world that humans must make sense of themselves? Comment your thoughts below, and if this made you think, hit like and subscribe to keep the conversation going.